Hello, welcome back to More to the Story. I'm Janna Maron, and in addition to this podcast, I also publish a literary arts magazine called Under the Gumtree. We publish creative nonfiction and visual art. You can learn all about Under the Gumtree if you go over to the website and visit underthegumtree.com. There's information there on submitting and subscribing, and I've been saying this on all the recent episodes that I'm recording about how we need support. Under the Gumtree needs support to keep publishing. And over the summer, I had to send out an email asking for new subscribers to get our summer issue out. And as I'm recording, it's mid-September, and we are in production on our fall issue, which will come out in October. It's going to be our 14-year anniversary issue, if you can believe it. I started the magazine back in 2011, so it's going to be our 14-year anniversary. And as I have been returning to this podcast, I've also been delinquent in telling you that the podcast is sponsored by Cafe Santoro, which is my parents' boutique coffee shop and roastery in Northern California here. And earlier this year, and I'm still supporting them in setting up a Shopify store where you can order fresh roasted whole bean coffee. We don't grind it. You get the whole beans. You have to grind it yourself. But if you're interested in trying some of those beans, you can check out cafesantoro.com/Janna for a special discount for podcast listeners. And Cafe Santoro is spelled with two F's, Caffe Santoro. That's because we're using the Italian version to mean Cafe Santoro means coffee the Santoro way. So when you visit the coffee shop here in Northern California, or whether you get something in person or you order online, you are experiencing coffee the way the Santoro family does coffee. That's the little bit of the intention behind the name of the coffee shop. And I mean, as writers, we can never get enough coffee, right? Am I right? We have all kinds of different roasts, but my favorite is the decaf, and it's the best decaf that I've ever had. People drink it and they think it's not decaf. That's how good it is. So check it out. And I'm also offering 15-minute book diagnosis calls. So you can head on over to moretothestory.co/book diagnosis and grab a 15-minute phone call with me where we talk about what's the problem you're facing with your book project. And I diagnose the issue and recommend next steps that you can implement immediately. Yes, including some options that may be working with me, but we don't always know what you need until we talk. And that was a direct result of some things that I've experienced over the summer, having conversations with potential clients and people on my email list, where somebody booked a nail your book outline session with me, and she got on the call and she already has an outline and 80,000 words written. So the thing is, I know that a lot of times people feel stuck. They know something's wrong, but they don't always know what the problem is. And that's what these 15-minute diagnosis calls are designed to do, is to just kind of let me hear what you're facing. Let me zero in on what I think the issue might be and make some recommendations for next steps. So head on over to moretothestory.co/book diagnosis to grab one of those. Spots are limited. I only do a handful of those weekly, because as I've been talking about and posting about here on Substack, I'm learning how to recalibrate the way that I work and show up in my business that is more sustainable for my health and my energy. And my energy capacity is much less than it ever has been. And a big part of that is my illness. And my illness is what I've been learning, a warning sign, and it's a signal that my body sends me when, hey, it's time to slow down, it's time to rest, you're doing too much, you're taking on too much, not just in business, but in my personal life, in my emotional life, and the stress and the emotional overwhelm just gets to me, and I start to experience that stuff physically. So what are we going to talk about today? I will be completely upfront and honest and tell you this is how I make notes for my podcast. If you're listening, I'm holding up a notepad of paper with 4 bullet points handwritten. And it's a notepad that says memo from Janna across the top, and then across the bottom there are these little icons of telephones, like a row of telephones across the bottom. So this pad of paper, I think I have maybe 2 or 3 more in my desk drawer. This pad of paper is probably legit vintage at this point. It's got to be at least 20 or 30 years old, from the days when my dad used to have a print shop. So before he was in coffee roasting, way back when I was a kid growing up, he used to have a print shop, an actual shop with printing press machines, a huge cutter, a folder, a saddle stitcher. If you don't know what a saddle stitcher is, it's a machine that is used to staple the it's a binding, right? You're like stapling the fold and the crease of a booklet along the spine. And a folding machine. So I grew up in this print shop, and for holidays, my dad used to print customized notepads with people's names on the notepads. So like this one says memo from Janna with the design that I described. So he would do the same design and change the name at the top so people would get a personalized notepad, or like a stack of 10 personalized notepads as a Christmas gift at the holidays. And he would custom make those and print them in the print shop. And a couple months ago, I don't even remember what I was doing or where I found them, but I found this stack of old notepads that I still haven't used. So here I am making notes for the podcast, advertising my parents' coffee shop, Cafe Santoro, on an old vintage notepad that says memo from Janna that my dad printed in his print shop probably 30 years ago. And I'm saying all of that because since I relaunched this podcast, I think maybe every episode I've been talking about how I'm doing things to make it as easy as possible, where I just show up and hit record and start talking. So maybe sometimes I make notes, maybe sometimes I don't. The notes that I have today are those links that I want to make sure that I mention for you about getting the discount on the coffee, booking your book diagnosis call, and just a few thoughts on what I want to talk about today. And one of the things I've been doing to make this podcast super easy on myself is that I just record and I talk, as I said. And I decided to start doing some interviews with clients, which I've done. Those are recorded and scheduled. And so I'm recording kind of out of order. So I have 2 or 3 recorded episodes with clients that I thought, I'll just publish these. And as I'm having these conversations with clients, things are coming up in the conversations where I'm like, I should do an episode on that. I should do an episode on that. And I'm saying that in the conversation. And I'm saying, look for that episode to come. Look for that episode to come. And then as I'm planning and scheduling these episodes, I'm thinking, it maybe would make more sense if I did that episode, recorded it and released it before these conversations, so that there's a little bit more context around how and why we're doing things the way that we're doing them. So here I am recording one of those episodes that I've been saying in episodes that are already recorded. I need to do an episode on this topic, and the topic is genre, and specifically nonfiction, and how broad that term is, and how there are so many subgenres under that umbrella, and what they all mean, how we talk about them, why it's important in some contexts and not important in others. And there's also this other little idea around how I approach the difference between certain types of nonfiction. So it feels like a lot to cover in one episode, and I haven't quite figured out whether it's going to be 1 or 2 episodes. So this might be part 1, and maybe there's a part 2 coming. I don't know yet, because like I said, I'm just going to do things easy, and I'm going to talk and see how long I'm talking for and decide if, it's time to stop and make a part 2. Okay? So just go with me, and if there's a part 2, there's a part 2, and if not, then there isn't. And if there is, it'll be coming out in the next maybe 2 weeks, because I think I've started doing like every other week for the podcast, and in between I'm doing a written post on Substack. So I'm not overwhelming you because I had been doing an email and a podcast every week. So I don't want to overwhelm you with 2 posts every week on Substack, because if you remember, all my stuff is now on Substack. So my emails go out from Substack and then they become a Substack post. And then my podcasts go out from Substack as well. And so this also doesn't overwhelm me. So I'm not overwhelming you and I'm not overwhelming me, because instead of having to do 2 things a week, I only do 1 thing a week. I do 1 written post, and then the next week I do a podcast post. We'll see how long that works. Again, trying to just keep things light and easy over here in the more to the story Janna Marlise Maron universe. Okay, so this topic of genre has come up recently. I mean, it's always a topic, right? For people who write nonfiction, if you're coming to this podcast from the world of you write personal stories, you write memoir, you write personal essay, creative nonfiction, you know that genre is kind of always a topic of conversation. So what you're going to hear today is kind of my take. I don't have any sources. I don't have any references. Well, that's not entirely true. I might refer to a couple books here and there, but what I'm sharing today is kind of my own take and my own perspective on the genre based on 15 or so years of my work in this world, including working with clients, including publishing under the gum tree, including getting my master's degree, and including going to workshops and all these things. Okay, so there's this amalgam of experience that I'm bringing with me, and every professional in this world has their own take and their own perspective, and everyone is going to have a different way of looking at it. But the thing that came up for me recently is I have been working with a couple different business coaches who want to write books. And they come to this idea of writing a book from the world of online business and content creation, right? So that's the world of blogging, newsletters, yes, social media, and like captions for your Instagram posts and script for your Instagram reels, and like whatever else we do in the online business world to market and share our work with our audience. And I come from that world too, because I have professional experience as the content director for a popular internet brand, which I did for 5 years before I started my business. And before that, I was freelancing as a writer and an editor, and a lot of my work was in that world. It was in the online business space. So I come from that world kind of professionally, but I come from this other world of literary, more academic, from literary, and I will say more academic perspective personally, because I've always been a writer in school. I've always been drawn to literature classes. I have an English degree. My bachelor's degree is in English. My master's degree is in English with a creative writing emphasis. I started a literary arts magazine. I go to this conference called AWP every year, which is an academic writing conference. AWP stands for the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, and writing programs effectively means programs at universities. And that world is very different from the online business world, right? And so as I've been getting support in my business and working with these business coaches who want to write books, and by the way, I'm getting clients from that world. And I have worked with clients in that world in the past, but when I started my business, it was primarily for the literary academic world, because that's where my audience primarily existed as someone who publishes a literary magazine. That's primarily the audience that I reach. That's primarily the audience who's interested in a magazine like the type of magazine that I publish. And those are the type of people that I'm meeting when I go to AWP. So suddenly there's this kind of like convergence of crossover happening in my business, where yes, I'm serving this literary academic audience, but I'm also starting to serve this well, I'm going to call it commercial for lack of a better word, because it's a business audience. And obviously in business, our primary goal is to offer a service or a product that helps people, but also that can earn us a living, right? So there's some very obvious differences to me between these two audiences, but these two audiences are often very unfamiliar with each other. And you see this happening in the literary academic writing world when writers bristle at things like the mention of platform and marketing. And, because in that world, we want to protect our artistic integrity, and we feel like we're losing it or selling out if we suddenly are trying to promote ourselves and, oh, heaven forbid, make money from this thing that we called art first, right? It's the age-old conflict between art and capitalism. So the literary writing world kind of bristles at some of the things that happen in the online business world. But guess what? They could benefit from the things that happen in the online business world because, then maybe they would sell more books. Then maybe they would know how to sell their book to a publisher or an agent in the first place. And there's all kinds of services and courses and workshops and things out there to teach that world how to do those things. I don't do that because I focus on progress and process and taking action and making a plan and being strategic around how you can work towards your goals and achieve your goals. And in my view, taking action is the single most beneficial thing you can do to start to see the outcomes that you want to see in your creative life. That's a whole other topic. And in the online business world, is pretty much, I'm going to say, for the most part, probably mostly unaware of the things that go on in the literary academic writing world. And so the services that are out there for the online business world are very formulaic. I'm just going to say it. I had a rant on Instagram a couple months ago because I kept getting this ad from a dude in my Instagram feed about write your book in 30 days. And I just was like, what the actual fuck? And yeah, this is going to be an explicit podcast episode because no, just like absolutely not. It's okay. Maybe you can sit down and bang out 50,000 words in 30 days, which is what NaNoWriMo is all about. If you know what NaNoWriMo is, National Novel Writing Month. And I've always kind of not been a fan of NaNoWriMo for the same reason. But what's the quality of those words? And if you're out there bragging about writing your book in 30 days, why should I as a reader sit down and spend time with something that you didn't spend hardly any time on? No, thank you. So that's all about like a formula and how you can like turn your whatever thing it is that you're selling into a formula that works in a book, and then suddenly now you have this thing that you can start selling and have an additional revenue stream, and it fits into the universe of your marketing for your business, and it's a way to get your message out there and build more clients and leads and blah, 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 blah. Yes, a book can do all of those things for your business. However, this is a long-winded background to why this topic of genre matters. Because I've been using the word nonfiction because it's the catch-all. It's the umbrella for all these little subgenres under nonfiction, just like fiction is the umbrella and a catch-all. So if you're listening to this and you're coming to the world of wanting to write a book and you have no idea what I'm talking about and you're thinking, well, nonfiction, this is where I started all this by saying this came up for me recently, and let me finish coming circle here, get back to why this came up for me recently, because I was in a group coaching program with some other women in the online business world, and I've been using this word nonfiction to talk about the type of books that I work on. And the women in this group were like, nonfiction? I don't want to write a nonfiction book. That's a textbook. That's a history book. That's a finance book. That's stuffy. That's a biography, like a 1,000-page biography. And suddenly I was like, oh, there's this like connotation around nonfiction as a genre as a whole, not from the literary academic writing world, but from this online business world, where they hear me say nonfiction and they're thinking something that's like highly researched, highly documented, footnotes, endnotes, like a research paper. They're thinking research paper, book. And I'm using it to talk about all these other subgenres like fiction. So I'm going to equate this to fiction for a second, because if you are a reader and you like to read fiction, if you meet somebody and you're saying, oh yeah, I love to read fiction, that's not sufficient for the conversation, right? Because immediately they're going to say, oh, what kind of fiction? And there's all these subgenres. Well, there's historical fiction, there's romance, there's fantasy, there's science fiction. Just to name a few, that's only 4. And by the way, there's like crossovers between all of those that I just rattled off. Like there's romantasy, which is like a romance and history, like Outlander is an example of that. Sometimes science fiction and fantasy crossover. And what's the difference between science fiction and fantasy? I didn't even know that for the longest time. My sister had to explain it to me because she's into both. Science fiction is all about technology and futuristic worlds. And fantasy is magic. I didn't know the difference for the longest time. And there's also speculative fiction. That's this whole other nuance around when there are elements that don't exist in current times, but the storyline and the events are meant to... See, I can't even explain it in a very clear and succinct way. The events and the storyline are meant to represent and resemble our actual real world with elements that don't yet exist in the real world. And there's also starting to be speculative nonfiction. What does that even mean? Don't ask me. I could probably try to explain it, but I haven't dug into it enough because that's not the realm that I operate in. Okay, so just like there are all these subgenres of fiction, and you're going to connect with somebody, like if you're a fantasy person, you're going to connect more with someone else who's also into fantasy, but maybe not so much with someone who's into romance, for example, right? So that makes sense, okay? So the same thing happens over on the nonfiction side of things. And by the way, why does this stuff even matter? Well, it matters for a couple reasons. I was going to try and say the most important reason, but no, there is no most important reason. The main reason that this stuff has come about and matters is so that readers know how to find your book, and so that booksellers know where to put your book in their store. So if readers are coming to your store and they're looking for memoir, sometimes booksellers will have a memoir section. Sometimes they will just have an autobiography section, which is where they put the memoirs. But if you're fiction and you're going to the bookstore and you only want to look at what's new in fantasy, you're going to go straight to the fantasy section of the bookstore. It's going to say fiction in big letters, but then the shelves themselves are going to be labeled with these subgenres. And the same thing happens over in nonfiction. And in nonfiction, in the nonfiction side of the bookstore, you're going to see things like, yes, some of those boring topics that I started out with, history, finance, business, yada, yada. So where this crossover between that literary world and the online business world is happening for me is that there are these women in online business who want to write about their personal story. This has happened to me now 3 times. I've had 3 clients do a Nail Your Book Outline session with me, and they are working on a book that is effectively their personal story, but it's their personal story within the framework of their business, or maybe not necessarily their business, but what they do in their business and how it can help and serve their audience. So what do they do with that kind of book? It's not a memoir, because memoir is strictly personal narrative, and memoir, that word memoir means memory. So there's not, like, if you're writing straight memoir, like we're going to go back to the early days of the memoir genre when it started blowing up with The Glass Castle. And there were some others around the same time, but that's kind of one of the monumental books in the genre, The Glass Castle and Liar's Club by Mary Karr. These books are straight memoir, personal narrative based in memory. There's no research. There's nothing beyond the author's personal story in those books. That is your kind of like quintessential definition of memoir. Well, the genre has evolved, especially in recent years, because it kind of exploded. So now it's more like, well, why do readers care about another story of living, being homeless and living on the streets, or abusive, being raised by abusive parents? Kind of some of the themes of those 2 memoirs that I just mentioned. Especially if you're not a celebrity, right? The celebrity memoir genre has really blown up in recent years. So if you're not a celebrity, why does anybody care about your personal story? So it's evolved over the years to this genre that people in the industry have called both memoir plus and a hybrid memoir. Both of those terms are kind of interchangeable, and they mean the same thing to include books that are someone's personal narrative supplemented by either some sort of research around a particular topic or theme, or like social commentary or critique also around a specific topic or theme. And sometimes the research and that critique can both happen. Sometimes it's one or the other. One of my most recent favorite examples of this type of book is Already Toast by Kate Washington. She's a personal friend of mine who lives here in Sacramento. And this is her story of being a caregiver for her husband while he was going through a rare form of cancer. And so, yes, it is her story of caregiving for her husband, but it is supplemented by all of this research and really almost journalistic reporting on this topic of caregiving in America and how it affects primarily women of color. And there's a lot of statistics and data around how low paying these jobs are, how much burnout it creates for the women who are doing these jobs. And so that's a perfect example of a memoir plus or a hybrid memoir where the author is taking their own personal experience as the lens to examine this larger cultural topic or issue. There's tons of books out there like this. This one just happens to always be on top of my mind because it's on my bookshelf right over there, and also because I know Kate and we talk about it a lot. So some of the other subgenres, I would say memoir is probably the best known subgenre of this greater umbrella of nonfiction. But several years ago, and this actually started, well, I don't have timelines, or like I said, I didn't do any research. I don't have any documentation, but these things can be looked up. And if you're interested, there was this shift in, and listen to me, I'm even like talking over myself and interrupting myself because notes, because I didn't do notes. Okay. So under the nonfiction umbrella, we also have journalism and news reporting. Because what is nonfiction? It just basically means that it's not fiction, okay? So fiction means invented. You made it up. Nonfiction simply means it's not fiction. So it's not invented. It's not made up. It's true. It is based in truth. And then we have journalism, which is nonfiction, but it's a very specific type of nonfiction because it's not just based in truth, it's based in fact, or at least we hope that it's based in fact, right? But years ago, and this started around the time of writers like Truman Capote with his book In Cold Blood, this newer version of journalism emerged that it started being called new journalism. And it was new because the original sort of maxim for journalists is that you're completely objective and you cannot insert yourself into the story, because as soon as you insert yourself into the story, it's biased. You're revealing your bias to the reader. You're supposed to be neutral. Of course, we know that's nearly impossible. But you're supposed to be able to present both sides of any story to your reader so that they can make up their own mind. And I do have my bachelor's minor is in journalism, so I did study journalism, and I actually worked as a newspaper reporter. It was my first job out of college for 5 years. Small community newspaper, you've never heard of it, but I do have experience doing this type of work way back in the early 2000s, before anything existed online, before any of this community journalism existed, before any of this like fake news nonsense existed, right? But this idea of new journalism started emerging with writers like Truman Capote because he inserted himself into the story. And not only that, but instead of following the traditional, Hunter S. Thompson is another good example of one of these kind of like new journalists back in the day. Like, and I lost my train of thought again. They started inserting themselves into the story, but not only that, there was this move away from the traditional structure of news writing and news reporting into this more narrative form, meaning there's a beginning, middle, and end to the story. Whereas if you know anything about traditional journalism, it's all about the who, what, when, where, and the inverted pyramid, right? The inverted pyramid where you get all the important information in the first paragraph, the lead, and readers don't have to read beyond that if they don't want to, because the lead tells them everything that they need to know in one paragraph. But the more you keep going, the more details you add, and you have that kind of like traditional, typical structure for a traditional journalistic news story. So these new journalism writers started emerging and moving away from that format into a more narrative format of journalism. And out of that emerged this term called creative nonfiction. And even today, people hear that and they think, well, what does that mean? How can nonfiction be creative? If it's true, if it's factual, how can it be creative? Well, all we're doing with that term, and by the way, Lee Gutkind is someone who is credited with kind of pioneering that phrase and the genre, especially in the academic world. He had a magazine for a lot of years called Creative Nonfiction. He has several books about the genre, which really helped to distill a lot of this kind of backstory, background information that I'm talking about here. And so what do we mean when we say creative nonfiction? All we mean is that we are applying the same craft, technique, care to writing a true story that fiction writers take or poets take when they write their fiction and their poetry. So it really was a way to turn this nonfiction genre that is like stodgy, boring, factual, structured journalism, and allow for this evolution and this merging of this genre into the literary academic world. And when I went to school and got my degree, there were, you went to grad school for writing, MFA or MA. I have an MA, and you could choose fiction or poetry. That's it. Those were the two genres for a literary degree in writing, fiction or poetry. And since I've graduated, there are now degrees for creative nonfiction. So I didn't have the opportunity to study specifically creative nonfiction when I was in grad school, although there were several classes that I took on things like memoir and the personal essay. And I've since been to several workshops and whatnot on the genre. I've been publishing in the genre for 14 years. But that's even just an example of how this genre is still kind of emerging and gaining legitimacy in the world of writing and literature. But for those online business folks, they just want to write a book that's going to help their audience. And yeah, it's going to include some of their personal story, but it's also going to include some things that are going to tell their readers how to do things. Well, that's another very specific type of nonfiction book that in the publishing world, we use the word prescriptive to talk about those type of books, because they're the self-help books, the how-to books, the business books, where you are literally prescribing something for the reader to do in order to help them, learn something, in order to help them improve their life or their situation or their business in some way. That is a prescriptive nonfiction book. And guess what? You can still write that book in a very creative way. And guess what? You can still include your personal story in that book. And that's what these new clients that I've been talking to want to do and are doing. And they need help and support to do that. And I'm here to help them and support them. And I can do both. I can do both the literary memoirs and personal essays, and I can do these prescriptive nonfiction books. And there is more for me to say, but I've already been talking for almost 40 minutes. So I'm going to end this podcast episode today here. And so there is going to be a part 2. Look at that. We didn't know that there was going to be a part 2 when I started, but surprise, there's going to be a part 2. Because the next thing I want to talk about is, I'm not even going to give this as a question. I'm just going to say the next thing I want to talk about is, for me, there is a different approach for these two different types of books. If you're writing a prescriptive book versus if you're writing memoir, personal essay, literary, creative nonfiction, I approach these two types of books very differently. However, I do not approach the client differently. I treat you the same. I give you the same attention and care. I give you the same level of feedback. I'm asking you questions. I am coaching you through this process of discovering the story that you want to tell, discovering the reader that needs this story, and discovering the best way to tell this story in a way that your reader is going to hear it, receive it, internalize it, interpret it, make it their own. You know what happens when you read a book. It becomes a part of you, even if it is what we're going to call a boring prescriptive book. It's not boring, by the way, because the only reason those books are effective is because of the author's personal story. So if that's the type of book that you want to write, you should write it, and you should include your personal story, and I can help you do that. Okay, so this has been a very long-winded, roundabout way to talk about why the genre of nonfiction is so important, what it means for depending on the type of book that you want to write. And part 2 is going to get more in detail on the different approach that I take based on the type of nonfiction book that you want to write. So tune in in next time for all of that goodness. And in the meantime, check out Under the Gumtree at underthegumtree.com. Order some coffee from cafesantoro.com/Janna. And book your diagnosis call with me at moretothestory.co/bookdiagnosis, because if anything that I've talked about on today's episode is stirring up these questions around, oh, that makes a lot of sense, and I don't know what that means for me, and now I don't know what to do with what I'm trying to do. I don't know where I fit. I don't know. Book a call. Tell me all about it, and we'll figure it out in your next steps. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. The theme song is written and performed by Jeremy Maron. You can follow Under the Gumtree on Instagram at, what is it? At Under Gumtree. You can follow me on Instagram at Janna Marlise. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. And I will talk to you soon on the next episode of More to the Story.